So good afternoon. Dimitri, thank you very much for the introduction. Again, my name is Mike Ansley, James Michael Ansley, and I am the General Manager for 3Com for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. What I want to do this afternoon is spend the next 10 to 15 minutes talking to you about some interesting purchasing techniques I've seen in my travels throughout Europe, Middle East, and Africa. It's a broad territory, and I get to experience the way that different companies, different verticals, approach networking vendors in terms of negotiation. So I want to share some war stories with you. And, you know, I thought about renaming my presentation, How to Terrorize Your Networking Vendor When Negotiating with Them. I decided not to. My marketing team didn't think it was a good idea. So let me, let's see. There we go. Let me start by talking about the basics. And we all know this. It's tough out there. It's really tough, and it's not just Russia. Last week, they declared the UK still in recession. In Spain, they figure unemployment's going to go to 30%. South Africa, the economy is desperate. Our industry, your budgets are declining faster than the GDP. You have less money to spend. It is really rough out there. If you look at hardware vendors, I would argue that your hardware budgets are declining faster than your overall IT budgets. Okay? The economy is not going to get better quickly. I think most economists would agree with that. It's going to be difficult, like 1%, 2% GDP growth for the foreseeable future. Your customers, the people you service, have more demands on you today than they had a year ago. And the issue is that the economy is hyper-competitive. Every dollar of profitability is precious, and it is fought for by your companies, by my company, you know, with aggression. So it is a tough economy. That puts a lot of pressure on you. This is an interesting graphic, and I'm going to, before I share with you some war stories about how to get more for your networking dollar, I just want to lay some foundational concepts. This is an interesting graphic. It's from the Gartner Group, and essentially what it's saying is, before you decide on your negotiating strategy, understand where a technology is in its life cycle. Makes sense, makes good sense. What vendors do is they try to mystify technology. They try to convince you that it is more complex than it actually is. I'll give you an example. LAN switching. The green color actually defines where the technology is in its life cycle. The red color actually suggests where the manufacturers would like you to perceive it to be. And that's true with routers, with switches, with wireless. Now, I'll have you note on this study, this was in 2007. We're 2 years later. So if you look at your primary networking technologies, they're mature. Let me give you a couple extra points around the maturity of the technology. 3Com, the founder of 3Com, invented Ethernet in the late 1970s, Bob Metcalfe. Ethernet's been around for a long time. We chair the IEEE 802.3 working group. That is the working group that defines Ethernet. If you look at the new developments in Ethernet, they are incremental. 40 gigabit Ethernet, 100 gigabit Ethernet, energy efficient Ethernet, standards like 802.3AZ, 802.3AT. They're incremental. Ethernet is not fundamentally changing. If it's a commodity, and I would argue it is, you need to align your negotiating strategy with your vendor to represent a commodity purchase, like you purchase PCs. So if you agree with that foundation, I'll give you some stories on what I'm seeing out there in terms of how people are negotiating with us. A couple things. Open standards. We are seeing in our industry, there were proprietary standards for routing, like EIGRP. We are seeing companies move to OSPF. OSPF is an open standard. It defines interoperability. If you can't interoperate with other vendors, you have vendor lock. Vendor lock is a mechanism that manufacturers use to charge you more. They lock you into their technology and you can't look at competitors. Not a great place to be if you want to negotiate. In fact, I was with one of the largest Russian banks yesterday, and they're transitioning a massive routed network from EIGRP to OSPF. They're trying to get more value out of their networking dollar. If we look at the second point, multi-vendor networks, exactly the story I told you about this Russian bank, We're experiencing this all over Europe. In the banking industry, we deal with BBVA, one of the largest banks in the world. ICBC in China has the largest branch network of any bank anywhere. They use a multi-vendor strategy. Erste Bank in Eastern Europe, multi-vendor strategy. They get the most out of their dollar. And what they do, they challenge vendors like us to offer our best all the time. Not just on the first purchase, but every day we have to compete to deliver value to our customers. The final point here, which is an incredibly aggressive purchasing technique, is something called an e-auction. Does anyone know what an e-auction is? An electronic auction? It is painful, and it is a vendor's worst nightmare. What a company does is they define a technical specification. And if you want to negotiate well, know what you're buying. If you know what you're buying, you have the upper hand. If a manufacturer like ourselves mystify the technology, you're going to pay a premium for it. Okay? So define what you want. Look for compliance to your specification. Get all of your vendors on the phone and say, will you do it for this much? Will you do it for this much? And you take it down to the lowest possible price where the last vendor is willing to do the bid. It is incredibly aggressive. But I've seen this happen in a number of places. Telefonica, one of the largest service providers in the world, does this very aggressively. And they do it on their internal purchases. They do it on their managed service purchases. And they get the best value for their technology dollar. And I'll tell you a couple more stories about that. One of the things in terms of negotiating, the French Railways, one of our largest customers in EMEA, 300,000 people in the company, massive network. They put out an $18.5 million bid last year. And when I went into the negotiation, they had our financial reports sitting on the corner of the desk. They didn't say anything about it. They didn't reference it. They just let it sit there, our quarterly results. So when I'm walking into the negotiation, they know what my income statement looks like. They know what my profitability is. Didn't mention it. But in terms of negotiation, they had an upper hand. I was on my back foot as soon as I entered the door. And if you look at our industry, the manufacturers in networking equipment are making 65%, 68% gross margins on a commodity product, right? You can get more value for your IT expenditure. This Gartner report talks about multi-vendor, and Gartner has been one of the biggest proponents of using multiple vendors in a network. Okay? And they've been saying this for years because they think you can get more for the dollar, and in today's economy, you need to get more for the dollar. So I'll talk about a couple of stories. Earlier this year, PSA Peugeot Citroen was making a multi-vendor decision. They had been using a single vendor. They decided it was time to challenge that vendor and get more value from them. They took their network and they broke it up into functional areas. The distribution network, the manufacturing network, the administrative network. And they essentially broke up the tender process, and they had vendors like ourselves and our competitors bid over segments of the network. Today, they've gone from a single end-to-end vendor network to one that is split 40-60 between two vendors. They have challenged us to offer our best value, and they've challenged the incumbent to offer value they'd never seen before. Good for PSA, good for PSA shareholders. The government of Israel ran an e-auction last year. This was about $25 million of Ethernet switching equipment. Again, very aggressive process. They got the best value for their taxpayer. Let me be candid. We typically, as a company, work at around 60% gross margins. I know what my standard margins are when I sell product. We had to drop our margin position in half to win this deal, right? So I suggest to you, do look at your vendor's financial statements. You need to know that you're dealing with a profitable vendor, right, that has a long-term future. We are generating cash as a corporation. Our profitability is as good as it has been in a decade. You need to know you're dealing with a vendor that has a long-term future. But you need to make sure you're getting the best value for your shareholders or your taxpayers. So just as some final comments, the industry is commoditized. It's all about price performance. You should treat purchasing Ethernet, IEEE standards, routers, IETF standards. You should treat that like you would any other commodity product like a PC. You can get the most value. Now, I'm not saying you be irresponsible about that. You put the product into a proof of concept lab against competitive products, and you make sure it does absolutely everything that you need it to do. It is about price performance. It's about energy savings. It's a huge issue today. I was in South Africa last week, and they say that the energy prices have tripled in the last 8 months. In countries like South Africa, they say that the capital cost of a switch, it will take, in 3 years of the energy price, you will equal the capital cost. That is incredible. It's onerous in terms of the total cost of ownership, but it is a reality. Merchant silicon vendors in our industry, these are vendors that just build chipset, Ethernet chipsets, a company like Broadcom, ensure that you have the thinnest silicon possible, right? It means less heat dissipation, smaller power supply, less air conditioning, and you can reduce the green footprint of your switching vendors. Proprietary silicon doesn't give you the same advantage necessarily, and it's not as fast to market. If you look at integrated management, a common operating system on your wireless product, on your router, on your switch. We have something called Comware 5. You can ensure that your training costs are reduced and that you have better manageability of your network. Brings down your OpEx. If you look at application support, open standards I talked about, embedded services, like compression as an example, embedding compression so you can get more out of your circuits, you can get more value. So again, what I hope I've done is I've shared with you some thoughts around how to negotiate with networking vendors. I think you can get more out of these vendors, including ourselves. We have a terrific partnership with Kroc in Russia, and I would ask you to challenge both Kroc and 3Com to offer you more in terms of your networking budget. So that's it, Dimitri. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A really interesting and sometimes a really surprising presentation, even for me.
What's that?
Surprising, yeah.
Why was it surprising?
Because you're telling us how we properly need to deal with you to get the more discounts.
I am.
So
I actually am.
And I think it's one of the greatest part of your presentation, yeah? Коллеги, есть ли у нас вопросы? Okay, in this, we have no questions. Possible you explain all the main tricks for we need. Yeah?
I hope so.
So I have the question from my side.
Sure.
What is most difficult for you as the head of one of the leading network vendors during these negotiations? So what is your challenging points?
Well, you know, a negotiation is about give and take, right? It's about keeping my company profitable while delivering the best value to our customers. And you raise the point. It's surprising that I would actually tell you how to negotiate with me. And let me give you the reason why. I've been in the networking industry for over 20 years. The days of FDDI, ArcNet, ATM, Token Ring, IBM 8228s, 3090s, 3745s, if this means anything to anyone. And there was a time where our industry was highly innovative. And when we're innovative, we need to recoup the R&D. We're long past that stage. And I would argue that because one vendor dominates our industry, that you pay a premium for it. And that bothers me because my job in my whole career has been to delight my customers, to give my customers the best possible value. And I don't believe my customers are getting value today. So I want to create the opportunity for our customers to get better value.